I signed my name on those papers while my mother watched and I almost smiled. Almost. My name is Vera. I am 31 years old and 3 days before I sat at that kitchen table with a pen in my hand, I had buried my grandmother. Her name was Ruth, and she was the only person in my entire life who had ever looked at me like I was worth something. The funeral was small. Quiet. Exactly what she would have wanted. I held it together through the whole service, through the graveside prayer, through the drive back to her house in northern Connecticut, where I had spent every summer of my childhood, catching fireflies in mason jars and learning how to make her biscuits from scratch. I held it together through all of that. It was not until I was sitting alone in her kitchen the next morning, holding her favorite coffee mug, the chipped blue one she refused to throw away, that I finally let myself cry. My grandmother left me everything. I found that out 2 days after the funeral at a private meeting with her estate attorney downtown. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. I drove home in complete silence. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store for 20 minutes just staring at the windshield because I did not know what to do with my hands. She had a small house in Connecticut fully paid off, a piece of commercial land in western Massachusetts she had owned since the 1980s that had quietly tripled in value. A life insurance policy. Savings bonds. A brokerage account my grandfather had opened in her name decades ago and that she had never once touched. When her attorney read me the total estimated value of the estate, I had to ask him to repeat himself. It came out to just over $2 million. I want to be honest with you. Growing up, I was never the favorite. My mother made that clear in 1,000 small ways over the years, the kind of ways that do not leave bruises, but absolutely leave scars. I have an older brother, and then there is me. My brother is funny and loud and always knew how to make people feel like they were in on the joke. I was quieter. I read books. I got good grades nobody celebrated. I became a paralegal at a mid-size firm in Hartford, and I was genuinely good at my job, which my mother mentioned exactly 0 times in my adult life. My grandmother saw me differently. She said once when I was maybe 14 sitting on her back porch that the ones who watch carefully are the ones who understand the most. I did not know what she meant then. I do now. So when her attorney told me what she had left me, my first instinct was not excitement. It was dread. Because I knew my family, and I knew what was coming. I did not tell anyone right away. I needed a day to think. I drove to her house that afternoon and walked through every room slowly, touching things. Her reading chair. The row of paperbacks on the windowsill. The little ceramic owl on the kitchen counter she had bought at a church sale in 1994 and declared the most useful thing she had ever owned because it held her rubber bands. I was standing in her bedroom doorway when my phone rang. It was my mother. She wanted to know how I was doing. She said she had been thinking about me. Her voice was warm in a way I had not heard in years. The soft, careful warmth of someone who needs something from you and has not asked yet. I told her I was okay. I told her the service had been beautiful. I did not mention the attorney. She said she was thinking of coming by the house that weekend. She said she and my uncle and his wife had been talking and they felt it was important that the family sit down together and go through everything while it was all still fresh. She used the word closure. She used the 3 times. I told her that sounded fine. I hung up and stood there in my grandmother's bedroom for a long time. I want you to understand something about my family before I tell you what happened next. My uncle is my mother's younger brother. He is 57 years old, and he has spent the better part of 2 decades making just enough money to feel entitled to more. He married a woman I will call his wife, and she is the kind of person who compliments your shoes while calculating how much they cost. They have a son in his late 20s who has bounced between sales jobs and has a habit of treating every family gathering like a business pitch. My uncle had visited my grandmother exactly twice in the last 4 years. Both times he needed money. She gave it to him. Both times he needed money. She gave it to him both times. That was who she was. So I knew, when my mother called, that the weekend gathering was not about closure. I knew what it was before she finished her sentence. And I made a decision right there in my grandmother's bedroom that I have not once regretted. I called her attorney back. I asked him one specific question. I asked whether, as the named executor and sole primary beneficiary of the estate, I had the legal authority to take certain protective actions before the estate cleared probate. He told me yes, within specific parameters, and then he walked me through exactly what those were. Then I called a locksmith. When my family arrived that Saturday, I was already at the house. I had coffee made. I had brought her good dishes out of the cabinet, the ones with the blue flowers she saved for company. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands folded and let them come in. My mother arrived first. She hugged me longer than usual, which told me everything. My uncle and his wife came in right behind her, and his wife immediately started walking slowly through the living room the way you do when you are appraising something and trying not to look like you are appraising something. My cousin came in last, jacket on, like he had somewhere to be, already scanning the room. They sat down. We drank coffee. My mother talked about my grandmother for exactly 4 minutes before my uncle gently steered the conversation to the estate. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands on the table and put on a face of great concern. He said he wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. He said estates could get complicated. He said he had done some research and understood that probate in Connecticut could take a long time, and the house would just be sitting there, which was a liability, and he had some contacts in real estate who could get us a very fair price quickly, well below the hassle of listing it properly, if we moved fast. He looked at me and waited. I nodded slowly like I was thinking it over. His wife chimed in then, her voice entirely gentle, entirely calculated. She said she knew this was overwhelming, that grief did things to a person's ability to think clearly, and that it was lucky I had family around me to help navigate decisions I might not be equipped to make alone right now. She used the phrase emotionally compromised. She smiled when she said it. My cousin pulled a folder out of the bag he had brought in. He pushed it across the table toward me. He said he had drafted a simple agreement that would give my uncle temporary authority to manage the estate assets during probate. Just to keep things moving, just to protect everyone, just to make sure the house did not fall into disrepair while we waited for the courts to catch up. I looked at the folder without picking it up. Then I looked at my mother. She was watching the folder too. She did not look at me. I want to tell you what it feels like to sit across from the people who raised you and understand, clearly and completely, that they see you as an obstacle, not a person, not family, an obstacle between them and something they want. It feels like a door closing quietly in a room you did not know you were still hoping to get back into. I picked up the folder. I am a paralegal. I have spent 9 years reading contracts, flagging bad language, catching the clauses buried in paragraph 7 that nobody is supposed to notice. The document my cousin had drafted was not drafted by an attorney. I could tell by the third sentence. The language was loose in ways a real attorney would never allow. There was a clause in the middle, dressed up in reasonable-sounding terms, that would have given my uncle the authority to enter into purchase agreements on any real property held by the estate, without my explicit written approval for each individual transaction. In plain English, he could sell my grandmother's land in Massachusetts without asking me first. I set the folder back down on the table. I looked at my cousin. I said I had a few questions. He leaned forward. Ready. I asked about the oversight mechanism. He blinked. I asked who would be responsible for accounting, what the reporting interval was, and whether the agreement included a provision requiring independent appraisal before any asset sale. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My uncle stepped in. He said these were good questions, that we could work out the details, that the important thing right now was to get something in place so the estate did not stall. He pushed the pen toward me. I looked at that pen for a moment. Then I said, okay. I said they were right, that this was a lot, that I was glad I had them. I picked up the pen. My uncle visibly relaxed. My cousin leaned back. His wife stopped watching my hands. I signed. But here is the thing about working in a law firm for 9 years. You learn things. One of the things I had learned, years before any of this happened, was about signature protocols. I had processed enough estate fraud cases to know how document manipulation worked from the inside. 2 years ago, I had actually helped build the paperwork for a client who wanted a built-in alert system on her accounts after her son-in-law had tried something similar. I found it quietly fascinating. I went home that night and added the same mechanism to my own financial profile, just in case. My just in case had arrived. The signature I put on my cousin's document was not my legal signature. It was an alternate version I had registered with my firm's notary 18 months earlier as a fraud indicator, a specific variation that, if it ever appeared on a document submitted to a financial institution or to the probate court, would flag automatically for review and render the document void. It looked almost identical to my real signature. My family had no idea such a thing existed. I finished signing every page they put in front of me. I handed the pen back to my cousin. He tucked the folder into his bag with the careful satisfaction of a man who thinks he just won something. They stayed for another hour. My uncle talked about the Massachusetts land like he was already making plans for it. His wife started quietly asking whether the bedroom furniture was going to an estate sale or whether anyone had a claim on specific pieces. My mother mostly watched, occasionally adding something soft and redirecting when the mood in the room shifted toward something she could not quite control. I refreshed the coffee. I listened. I let them talk. After they left, I locked the front door and stood in the kitchen for a long time. My grandmother's ceramic owl sat on the counter, exactly where it had always been. I picked it up and held it for a minute. Then I called the estate attorney. I told him the document had been signed. The fraudulent signature was in play, and I needed him to file two things immediately. The first was a formal notice of my appointment as executor with the probate court, which we had been preparing since the day after the funeral. The second was a formal letter to every financial institution holding estate assets, registering my legal authority as sole executor and explicitly revoking any third-party authority claims. He had both filed before the end of the business day. 2 days later, my uncle called. His voice was different. The warmth was entirely gone. He said he had tried to contact the bank about the Massachusetts property and had been told there was a legal hold on all estate accounts. He said he did not understand what was happening. He said he needed not understand what was happening. He said he needed me to call the bank and clear it up. I told him I would look into it. He called again the next morning. Shorter, less patient. He said his real estate contact was waiting on confirmation and they were losing time. I told him the bank had flagged some paperwork for review and these things took time. He said he understood, but could I go in person? Could I make it a priority? Could I do it today? I told him I would try. I did not try. On the fourth day, he stopped asking nicely. He showed up at my apartment. He did not call first. He knocked for 2 minutes before I opened the door. He was wearing a jacket over a collared shirt, and he had the look of a man who has rehearsed this conversation but is already off script. He walked in without being invited and sat at my kitchen table, which is the kind of thing certain people do to remind you that they do not believe your space is really yours. He said the bank had sent him a letter. He said the letter stated that the document he had submitted had been flagged for a signature irregularity and had been forwarded for investigation. He said someone had clearly made a mistake. He said he needed me to write a letter confirming that the signature was valid and that the document had been executed in good faith. I sat down across from him. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I asked him to explain to me, in his own words, what the document was intended to do. He said it was exactly what they had told me. Temporary authority to manage assets. For my protection. I asked him why he had tried to use it to contact the bank about the Massachusetts property, without telling me first. He said he was trying to get ahead of things, to save time, that we had discussed this. I asked him when we had discussed him contacting financial institutions without my knowledge. His jaw tightened. He said I was being paranoid. He said grief was making me suspicious of people who were trying to help me. He said my grandmother would be heartbroken to see me treating family this way. I want you to know that sentence landed hard. It was designed to. He knew exactly what he was doing. And for about 4 seconds I felt it. The old familiar weight of being told that my clear-eyed view of a situation was actually just a character flaw. That what I was seeing was not real. That I was the problem. 4 seconds. Then I looked at him calmly and said that I had engaged an estate attorney who was now managing all aspects of the probate process, that any communication regarding estate assets should be directed to that attorney, and that I would be changing the locks at my grandmother's house by end of week. He stared at me. He left without another word. What came next was the part I had been anticipating and was still not entirely prepared for. My mother called that evening. She did not lead with warmth this time. She said I was being difficult. She said my uncle was only trying to help. She said I had always had trouble accepting help from people who loved me, that I had always been like this, closed off and suspicious, and that my grandmother had worried about it too. I wrote that last part down afterward. I wrote it down because I have spent a long time doubting my own memory, second-guessing my own interpretation of things, wondering if the story I told myself about my childhood was accurate or distorted, and hearing my mother use my dead grandmother as a prop to manipulate me in the same conversation where she was trying to steal from my dead grandmother's estate was clarifying in a way I cannot fully put into words. It was like a window coming into focus. I told my mother I loved her. I told her I would be in touch. I hung up. I called the estate attorney again the next morning. I told him I needed to understand whether the document my cousin had drafted and my uncle's subsequent attempt to submit it to a financial institution constituted anything actionable. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he wanted to loop in a colleague who specialized in estate fraud. He said he would set up a meeting. The meeting was 3 days later. There were 2 attorneys in the room. What they told me was careful and precise, the way attorneys talk when they are being honest but do not want to overstate. They said the document my cousin had drafted, combined with the attempt to use it to access estate accounts without executor approval, was consistent with patterns they had seen prosecuted as probate fraud. They said it depended heavily on intent and on what paper trail existed. I told them about the conversation I had recorded. Both attorneys looked up from their notes at the same time. I want to be transparent with you. I am a paralegal in Connecticut. I know the recording laws in this state. Connecticut is a 2-party consent state, which means I cannot record a conversation without the knowledge of the other parties. I did not record my uncle's visit to my apartment. What I did do, because I had understood for days that this moment was coming, was make a phone call to the estate attorney while my uncle was on his way over. A call I did not hang up. The attorney, who was on his cell phone at his desk, could hear the entire conversation through my speakerphone. He was a consenting party. He had his assistant begin transcribing from the moment my uncle walked in. Attorneys are very good at anticipating what people are going to say when they are backed into a corner. It is one of the most useful things about working with them. The transcript was 42 pages. My uncle had said a great deal. The attorneys filed a formal complaint with the probate court. They submitted the transcript, the flag document, and a timeline of contact attempts my uncle had made to financial institutions without executor authorization. The probate court issued an automatic protective order freezing any third-party authority claims on the estate pending review. 2 weeks after that, my uncle received a certified letter from the probate court requiring him to appear for a formal inquiry. He called me the night before the inquiry. I did not answer. He left a voicemail that lasted 4 minutes. It started with anger and ended with something that was trying very hard to sound like an apology. He said he hoped we could work this out privately. He said he had not meant any harm. He said family was everything to him. I listened to the voicemail once, then I forwarded it to the estate attorney. The inquiry was not a trial. Probate proceedings are civil, not criminal, and the standard is different. But what happened in that hearing room was nonetheless one of the most satisfying things I have ever witnessed from a chair. My uncle had hired an attorney. A real one, this time, not my cousin typing things into a template at midnight. The attorney was competent enough to understand immediately that his client was in serious trouble. He spent most of the hearing trying to reframe the narrative, arguing that the document had been a good faith attempt to help, that there had been a misunderstanding about scope, that my uncle had always had my best interests at heart. The probate judge was a woman in her early 60s with a kind of face that does not move much, regardless of what she is hearing. She listened to all of it. She read the transcript. She looked at the flag document. She looked at the timeline. Then she looked at my uncle and asked him, directly, why he had contacted the commercial bank holding the Massachusetts land account before the document had been submitted to the probate court for approval. His attorney objected. The judge overruled it. She asked my uncle again. He said he had thought the document was already valid once it was signed. She asked him whether he had read the document before presenting it to me. He said yes. She asked him whether he had read the clause regarding real property sales. He said he believed that clause was standard language. The judge put the document down. She said that clause was not standard language. She said it was specifically constructed to grant third-party authority without executor oversight. She said she found it difficult to understand how a document drafted with that level of specificity could have been intended as a simple family convenience. The protective order became permanent. My uncle was formally censured by the probate court and barred from any role in the estate administration. The court also referred the matter to the state attorney's office for review of the potential probate fraud charge, which is a felony in Connecticut. His attorney immediately began negotiating. I want to be honest about what happened to my family after that, because I think it matters. My uncle and my mother had a fight that my cousin described to me months later as one of the worst he had ever seen. My mother, according to him, had known more about the plan than she had told me. Not all of it, but enough. And when the legal pressure became real, she turned on my uncle the way frightened people turn on each other when the story they built together starts to fall apart. My cousin, to his credit, was the only one who called me without an agenda. He called about 6 weeks after the hearing and said he was sorry. He said he had known it was wrong and had told his father that, and his father had told him to stay out of it. He said he was not asking me to forgive anyone. He just wanted me to know that he knew. I told him I appreciated that. I meant it. My uncle eventually reached a settlement with the state attorney's office. He avoided a criminal conviction but paid significant restitution and legal fees, and the settlement is a matter of public record. His real estate contacts quietly disappeared. His wife, I heard, has not spoken to my mother since the hearing. My mother and I have not spoken in 7 months. I do not know if that will change. I am not holding the door open, but I am not padlocking it either. What I have learned, slowly and at considerable cost, is that I do not owe anyone a version of myself that absorbs their behavior without consequence. Not even people I love. Not even people I used to love. I sold my grandmother's house in Connecticut last spring. Before I listed it, I spent one last afternoon there alone. I walked through every room again. I sat in her reading chair. I held the chipped blue coffee mug. I stood in the doorway of her bedroom for a long time. I kept the ceramic owl. The Massachusetts land is under a long-term lease arrangement that generates steady income. I have moved into a better apartment. I am paying off debt that has followed me since my mid-20s. I have a savings account that, for the first time in my adult life, actually feels like security rather than fiction. My grandmother did not leave me $2 million because she thought I needed to be rescued. She left it to me because she had watched me for 31 years and trusted what she saw. She had more faith in my judgment than I had ever had in my own. Learning to believe what she believed about me has been the hardest and most necessary thing I have done. There's a quote I keep coming back to, something she said to me once on that back porch when I was a teenager and feeling invisible, and she was watching fireflies drift across the yard. She said that quiet people do not get less done, they just do not announce it first. She was right. She was right about most things. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you first, I want you to know that the clarity you feel when you finally stop doubting your own eyes is not paranoia. It is not bitterness. It is just the truth, finally catching up. Share your story in the comments. And if this one meant something to you, subscribe. There are more of them, and every single one is worth telling. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from spending years being told that what you clearly see in front of you is not actually there. I know that exhaustion well. I carried it for most of my life, and I did not fully recognize the weight of it until the moment I set it down. My uncle sat across from me at my grandmother's kitchen table and pushed a pen toward me like it was a favor. My cousin had typed up a document designed to quietly hand over authority he had no right to. My mother sat nearby and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer, and the version of me that existed even 3 years earlier might have signed that document in good faith, because that version of me had been trained, over a long time, to trust the people in that room more than I trusted my own reading of a situation. But I had spent 9 years in a law firm. I had watched what happens when people do not read what they are signing. I had processed enough cases built on small, quiet betrayals, documents with one bad clause buried in paragraph 7. Relationships leveraged at the exact moment a person was most vulnerable. To understand that greed rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives softly. It wears the face of concern. What my uncle did not understand, and what my cousin did not understand when he handed me that folder with the confidence of someone who had already spent the money, was that confidence does not disappear because you are grieving, pain does not make you stupid, and the people who assume otherwise are usually counting on the assumption to do all their work for them. There is a logic to how things unfold when people act from that kind of entitlement. My uncle moved fast because he assumed I was too overwhelmed to notice. He contacted the bank before the document was even filed because he assumed I would not check. He showed up at my apartment without calling because he assumed I still lived inside the old dynamic, the one where I absorbed rather than acted. Each assumption compounded the last one, and each one became part of the record that eventually made his position in that probate hearing completely indefensible. I think about that sometimes. The way his certainty that I was the easier target became the very thing that dismantled him. He did not lose because I was clever. He lost because he was careless, and he was careless because he had spent years watching me be quiet and mistook quiet for passive. My grandmother understood the difference. She watched me for 31 years and decided what she saw was worth protecting. That trust is not something I take lightly. There are days when I still feel the responsibility of it, the weight of being someone's final and most deliberate act of faith in another person. I try to live in a way that would make sense to her, not perfectly, but honestly. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes something in this story is simple. Your clarity is not the problem. The fact that you can see what is happening, that you have always been able to see it, that you have spent years being told your vision is distorted when it was never distorted at all, that is not a flaw. That is information, and you are allowed to use it. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal of the people who should have protected you first. It is the thing you do when you finally understand that waiting for them to change is not a plan. My grandmother left me the ceramic owl. It is sitting on my kitchen counter right now. I look at it every morning. It is the most useful thing I own.